Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Hannah, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with everyone. And thank you to the One Data team for having me here today. It's really a great honor to be here with you. And today I'm so excited to share with you my research into how to build habit forming products. I've been teaching and researching in this field for over a decade. I taught at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business, later at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design as well at Stanford. And I've really focused on the psychology of how do we get folks hooked to our product or service. And especially today, how can we use data as a source of engagement and retention for our clients and customers? So if you'll bear with me just one quick second, let me go ahead and share my screen with you so I can bring up these slides. And I think we are in business. All right, so let's dive in. So we've all seen what a tremendous impact these devices can have over our day-to-day lives. And so what I've devoted my career to is really understanding the patterns behind how companies get us hooked. You know, all the usual suspects when it comes to Meta, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, Slack, Snapchat, Slack, all of these companies, what is it that makes them so good at consumer retention and engagement? And so my idea was to codify in a book, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products, all of their design secrets, the psychology behind how these products and services do such an amazing job of getting us hooked. And I didn't write the book for them. I didn't write it for the video game companies and the social media companies. I wrote the book for you, the person building the product or service out there that would truly, honestly improve people's lives if they only used it. How many of us have worked on products and services that are fantastic, that are so promising, that are wonderful, and that people will tell us they'll use, but when it comes time for them to actually interact with the product, they don't. And so why does that happen? Well, it turns out that many products and services are not designed to be habit forming. It's our intention. We want people to engage with our product and service. We wish they would use our product or service the way they use Facebook or Instagram, and yet they don't. Why? Well, let's start with what is a habit. Let's get our definition straight. A habit is an impulse to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. And it turns out that about half of what you do every single day, day in and day out, is spurred by these impulses to do a behavior with little or no conscious thought. And I believe that we can use habits for good. We can improve people's lives. We can help them be more efficient at work. We can help them learn a new language. We can help them make more money. We can help them do all kinds of wonderful things if we can get them to use our product or service in a way that creates a healthy habit. So today I'm going to share with you my over a decade of research into habit-forming products. How are products designed to get users hooked and to create these healthy habits? Well, it starts by building a hook into your product. What is a hook? A hook is a design experience to connect your user's problem with your product with enough frequency to form a habit. Now, these hooks have four key parts. We have a trigger, we have an action, we have a reward, and finally an investment. So we're going to fly through these four steps. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time. So I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot overview of how to build habit-forming products. And of course, you can explore more. My book's right up here, Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. That's where you can get into the nitty-gritty of actually how to do it for yourself. But I want to give you an overview of these four steps that you can use right now to either diagnose why your product or service isn't habit-forming, and then hopefully make it habit-forming by figuring out how to diagnose the problem and improve it with new product or feature, with new features to then conform it to the use of this hook model. So every product or service that is habit forming must have a good trigger. What are triggers? There's actually two kinds of triggers. We have what we call external triggers. These are the pings, the dings, the rings, anything in our outside environment that tells us what to do next with some piece of information. Click here, buy now, do this, whatever it might say, that it's something in our environment that gives us some piece of information for what to do next. Those are external triggers. Now, we see those every single day, but what's actually more important than those external triggers when it comes to forming a habit are the internal triggers. What are internal triggers? Internal triggers are uncomfortable emotional states that we seek to escape. That's the number one internal trigger. Of course, there can be others as well, certain people, places, situations, routines, but the most common internal trigger are our emotions, and not just any emotion, negative emotions, feeling bored, lonesome, indecisive, fatigued. This is the source of 90% of the reason that we take an action, it's because of these internal triggers. Not what's happening outside of us, but what's happening inside of us. If you think about it, where do people go when they're feeling lonely, when they're seeking connection? Well, they go to Facebook, they go to Instagram, they go to TikTok, they go to some social network to connect. What about when we're feeling unsure about something? Before you even scan your brain to see if you know the answer to a question, you're Googling it immediately with little or no conscious thought. And what about when you're bored, between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when you have that big project you have to work on, but you don't really feel like it? Well, you go watch something on YouTube, check stock prices, sports scores, the news, worry about some problem thousands and thousands of kilometers away from you in order to escape this uncomfortable sensation of boredom. So the lesson here, what I want you to remember for your product or service, if you want to build a habit, you have to be able to articulate what is that internal trigger. If you and your team can't tell me what is the psychological itch, boredom, uncertainty, fatigue, anxiety, if you can't articulate what is that internal trigger, you're just flying blind. You're just hoping to get lucky. The next step of the hook model is the action phase. The action phase is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward, the easiest thing the user can do to get relief from that psychological itch. Now, let me show you a few habit-forming products, and I want you to see just how simple that key action is. Something as simple as a scroll on Pinterest, or a quick search on Google, or what can be easier than just pushing the play button on YouTube. These very simple solitary actions that take care of this emotional itch. Now, it turns out that there's a formula to help us predict the likelihood of these actions. This comes to us from BJ Fogg, one of my former colleagues at Stanford. And Fogg tells us that for any human behavior, your behavior, your customer's behavior, all behavior requires three things at the same time. We need sufficient motivation, we need sufficient ability, and a trigger must be present. We just talked about triggers. Let's talk about motivation and ability. Motivation is the energy for action, how much we want to do a particular behavior. And here we have these 6 levers that we can pull on to make a behavior more likely to occur based on how much of this element of motivation someone has. So for example, all of us seek pleasure and avoid pain. We seek acceptance, we avoid rejection. We seek pleasure and we seek hope and we avoid fear. We all have these 6 motivators that we can use to prompt people to action by boosting motivation. Now, that's just one axis of B equals MAT. The other one is ability, the capacity to do a particular action. And here again, we have these 6 levers that we can pull on to make a behavior more likely to occur based on how much time something takes, how much money something costs, how much physical effort is required. Brain cycles, this is a big one when it comes to technology products, especially data products. The harder something is to understand, the less likely the user is to do the behavior. So if you're using data to create this incredibly complex dashboard that nobody can figure out what the insights are that you want them to take action upon, they won't take the action because it takes too many brain cycles. It's too much work. It requires too much ability. That's a big one in your industry. When it comes to social deviance, we become less likely to do something when we see other people like us not doing it. And we become more likely to do it when we see other people like us doing it. And then finally, non-routine. When something is just something we haven't done before, we're not likely to do it. Whereas the more we do something, the easier it becomes because of this principle of practice, right? The more we do it, the easier it gets, the more likely we are to do it again in the future. So we can actually plot out these 3 elements of motivation, ability, and triggers on this conceptual model, where you can see on the y-axis motivation. The higher motivation, the more likely the behavior is to occur. On the x-axis, ability, the more ability someone has, the easier it is. The farther to the right someone goes, the more likely the behavior is to occur. So the more motivation, the more ability someone has, the more likely the behavior is to occur because it crosses that red threshold. And if and only if a trigger is present, then the behavior will occur every single time. Now, that boils down to the fact that any behavior, if your user is not clicking, if they're not interacting, if they're not purchasing, any human behavior, anything you do, has to have these 3 elements: sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, and a trigger must be present for every click, every transaction, everything you want the user to do. If they're not doing it, it's only because you're missing one or more of these 3 elements of human motivation. Next, sorry I'm speeding through this, but we have very little time. I hope you'll bear with me. The third step of the hook model, really the engine of the hook model, is the reward. And not just any reward. It has to be a special type of reward, because we know that to understand rewards, we have to go deep, deep in the brain. That the way our reward system works is by creating this anticipatory itch, that when we think we're going to get rewarded by something, that's when our nucleus accumbens, this part of the brain where the reward system is centered, becomes most active in anticipation of a reward. But when we actually get the thing we want, the thing that's going to make us happy and finally make us feel good, that's when the nucleus accumbens becomes less active. So the way the brain gets us to act is, in fact, by turning on this switch of desire. Did you know that there is a way to activate desire? Does anybody want to know how to do that? Would you like to know how to manufacture desire in your customers and users? Anyone curious? Well, I'm doing it to you right now. So when I took that long pause and I asked you this question, some of you perked up. What's he going to say next? What's the answer to the question? And that utilizes a variable reward, because the unknown is fascinating. Variability causes us to engage, it causes us to focus, and it is highly, highly habit forming. So we see this in all kinds of behaviors. This actually came to us from the classic work of B.F. Skinner, the father of operant conditioning. Took these pigeons, put them in a little box. Today we call this a Skinner box. And he gave these pigeons a little disc to peck at. And every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive a reward, a little food pellet. And at first, every time the pigeon pecked at the disc, they would receive that food pellet. And so they very quickly learned, peck at the disc, get a reward. But then Skinner had a problem. You see, one day he walked into his lab and he realized he didn't have enough of these food pellets. He couldn't afford to give it to the pigeons every time they pecked at the disc. He could only afford to give it to them once in a while. And what Skinner observed was that when he decided to give the pigeon the reward on a variable schedule of reinforcement, meaning sometimes they would get it, sometimes they wouldn't get the reward, the pigeon's rate of response, the number of times they pecked at the disc, increased when the variable reward was given on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. So when there's some kind of variability, when there's some kind of uncertainty, some kind of mystery, that causes people to engage, and it is highly, highly habit forming. Now, variable rewards comes in three types. There are three types of variable rewards: rewards of the tribe, rewards of the hunt, and rewards of the self. Let me introduce these to you briefly. Rewards of the tribe are all about social rewards. These are things that feel good, have this element of variability, and come from other people. So empathetic joy, feeling good because somebody else feels good, partnership, cooperation, competition, all of these things have this element of variability, feel good, and come from other people. So for example, on social media, what drives engagement is the uncertainty. You're never sure what you're going to see when you open up LinkedIn or TikTok or WhatsApp or Facebook for that matter. None of these sites, you're not certain about what you're going to see. There's always variability that comes from other people. The second type of variable reward is called rewards of the hunt. Rewards of the hunt are about the search for resources, material possessions, and in modern society, we get these rewards from information rewards. So when you think about the hunt for resources and variable rewards, many people think about slot machines. When people play one of these games of chance, there's uncertainty around what they might win when they pull on a slot machine. And you'll notice the exact same psychology at work online. Have you noticed, for example, why everything today has a feed? Why does everything today seem to have a feed? Well, if you think about it, it's all about this variable reward. Look at LinkedIn, right? When you go on LinkedIn, you're not sure what you're going to see. What's the latest industry news? You don't know. The only way to know is to keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, just like pulling on a slot machine. Now, when it comes to data products, data can also be used to create a variable reward. When you think about a dashboard, what is data giving you? It's all about that variability. It's all about the up-down, right? So when I check into my marketing dashboard or I check data from a financial services product, whatever the case might be, that variability of me not knowing, is the trend going up or down? That creates that uncertainty principle, that variable reward that keeps people checking and checking and checking. Now, the third type of variable reward is called rewards of the self. This is all about the search for mastery, completion, competency, and control. Best example of variable rewards of the self comes from gameplay. When people are playing some kind of game, Candy Crush or any other kind of game, there's uncertainty around what you might win, the next level you might get to. Even though you're not playing with other people, you're not winning anything in terms of material rewards, there's uncertainty around getting to the next level and achievement. Now, I know many of you, you're very serious business people. None of you play these games, I'm sure, but I bet you play this game every single day. Does this look familiar? Your email inbox? Checking that email to see what's in the email, who sent it, is it good news or bad news, trying to get to this mythical place we call inbox zero, is all about variable rewards. It's all about rewards of the self, mastery, completion, competency, and control. So the point of the variable rewards phase of the hook is to give the user what they came for, to scratch that psychological itch and yet leave them wanting more, having this element of variability around what they might find the next time they engage with a product or service. Finally, the last step of the hook model is the investment phase. The investment phase is where the user puts something into the product to make it more likely that they will come back in the future. Now, investments increase the likelihood of future engagement in two ways. The first way is by loading the next trigger, something that the user does to bring themselves back. Well, what might that look like? When you use WhatsApp or Slack or any number of other messaging services, when you send someone a message, there's no immediate reward, right? Nothing happens right then and there. What happens is you are loading the next trigger because you're likely to get a reply. And that reply comes coupled with, what's that example of right there that I'm showing on the screen, that red meatball there, the notification, is an example of an external trigger that brings you right through the hook once again. So the first way that investments increase the likelihood of the next pass is by loading the next trigger. The second way is by storing value. Now, storing value is a really, really big deal because for the first time in manufacturing history, products that we are making are appreciating in value. They're not depreciating it, not like your clothing, your car, your couch. Those things lose value with wear and tear. Habit-forming products should appreciate. They should get better and better the more we use them because of this principle of stored value. And they do this in a number of ways. For example, the more content you upload to a service, the better it becomes as your cloud storage solution. The more data you give to a product, right? The more personal identifiable information, the more usage information, the better it becomes. It stores value. It appreciates with use. The more data is used to tailor the experience based on your former usage patterns. The more followers someone has, the better they become the better the tool becomes in order to reach their future audience. So the more followers someone has, for example, on X, the more followers you have, the more valuable the tool is to you. Reputation. Reputation is a form of stored value that users can literally take to the bank. So my reputation on Upwork or eBay or Airbnb directly determines how much money I can make on one of these platforms. And how likely am I to leave one of these platforms after I've created this great reputation? It's kind of hard to do, right? It's kind of difficult. So what we found is that all habit-forming products, online, offline, enterprise products, consumer web products, doesn't matter, all habit-forming products use these 4 steps of the hook model: the trigger, the action, the reward, and investment. And through successive cycles, through these hooks, these are how our tastes are shaped, how our preferences are made, and how these habits take hold. So this is the most important slide of the presentation, that if you want to build a habit-forming product, again, I showed lots of consumer web examples like WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram, but the same exact rules apply for enterprise products as well. Any product that needs repeat engagement has to have a hook model. And those 4 steps are the trigger, the action, the reward, and the investment. So when you ask yourself these 5 questions, what internal trigger is the product addressing? What's the external trigger that prompts the user to action? What's the simplest behavior done in anticipation of reward? Is the reward fulfilling and yet leaves the user wanting more? And then finally, what's the bit of work done to increase the likelihood of the next pass through the hook? When you ask your team these 5 questions, this is how we diagnose and build a product that is used for the long term, that increases consumer habituation, retention, and engagement. Now, let's remember as well that we have a very special responsibility, because the products that we are making, these are things that people take to bed with them every night. It's the first thing we reach for in the morning before we say hello to our loved ones. So we have to use this knowledge for good, to help people live happier, healthier, more productive lives. And if you'll allow me to borrow from the words of Gandhi, to build the change that you wish to see in the world. And with that, thank you so very much for your time and attention. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. I think we have time for just a couple questions, but I'd love to get your feedback. So if you take a picture of this QR code on your phone, you'll be taken to a survey, or you can go to that URL, opinion2.us. Very quick survey where I'd love to hear what you thought of the presentation. And of course, please, you'll get a link to my SlideShare page where you have all the slides you just saw. I will apologize for speaking so fast. Hopefully you can see this later on as a recording and slow it down if you so need. If you have any questions for me, please reach out through my website at nirandfar.com. And with that, let's take a couple of questions. Let me take a quick look here, if you will, please. And it looks like we've got a couple questions here. Okay, first question is, what product management principles can we repurpose for how organizations can more effectively treat data as a product? So when we think about data as a product, it's not only about the data itself, it's how the data is used. Of course, right? What's the value it provides? And so if we want to be the kind of company that is providing one-time data use, you know what? You don't really need to have it. But of course, that's a very precarious business model, because now you constantly have to find new customers, as opposed to the products and services that build a habit. Once they acquire that company, that customer, now that customer has a much higher customer lifetime value because they continue to use the product. We know that we always have a much higher ROI keeping a customer than finding a new customer. So when we use data as our key asset, as a product, we can't just think about, hey, here's the data, do whatever the heck you want with it. We want to think to ourselves, how can this data be used repeatedly to build a habit? And really the key insight here is by using it through the variable reward phase. How is the data providing insights into actions in the future based on what changes in the data? And how can we present that information in a way that keeps the user coming back by following the hooked model? All right, I think we have time for one last question. How can the concept of habit formation be applied to data organizations to improve the impact of their team and their business? So what we really want to do is to have a common vocabulary. When a team can speak the language of habit formation, now they can build a product in accordance with those goals. So as opposed to saying, hey, I think this is a good idea, or I think that's a good idea, now when we have a vocabulary, when we can say, hey, I think the internal trigger isn't right, or we need better external triggers, or we need the action phase to be simpler, or the variable reward isn't cutting it, or we're asking the user to invest too much. This is a vernacular that we can use to all get aligned to building a habit-forming product that really does improve people's lives. And with that, thank you so much to the One Data team for having me here today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Stay hooked, everyone.